Tariq Berry said, "History, not hostility," a response to President Ibrahim Traoré. Peace be upon you all. Recently, President Ibrahim Traoré made remarks concerning Arabs, slavery, and the study of Sharia by young people from Burkina Faso. My purpose here is not to attack President Traoré personally, but to examine these issues in the light of history. One of the greatest tragedies of our time is the growing hostility toward Arabs among some of the non-Arab tribes of Africa, particularly toward Arabs whose families have lived in Africa for centuries. Take a look at an example of this hostility in the following video clip.
أما بعد نحن عرب النيجر تحياتي لكم خاصة جميع العرب. طبعا لقينا خبر من أخواننا العرب قال طلعوه من النيجر من النيجر وضروري بيستلموا أوراق. هذه ما فيها. نحن عندنا اثنين بس، يا أما نكون مواطنين لحكم الدولة، يا أما دا ما في حق قدامنا بس نقول لهم أو نكتب التاريخ أو التاريخ ينكتب علينا.
Much of this hostility is rooted in a modern historical narrative that divides the peoples of Africa into Arabs on one side and Africans on the other, as though these were two opposing peoples. Yet one of the most striking discoveries I have made during my research is that many of the very peoples now presented as non-Arab preserve traditions, tracing their own origins to Arab ancestors. I document many of these traditions in my book, The Unknown Arabs. That is precisely why I gave it that title. History also tells a very different story about slavery. There was no single Arab slave trade in the simplistic sense in which it is often presented today. The historical record shows a far more complex reality. Non-Arab tribes enslaved members of other non-Arab tribes. Arabs enslaved other Arabs. Some Arabs enslaved members of non-Arab tribes. Some non-Arab tribes enslaved Arabs. Europeans later participated extensively in the enslavement and transportation of both Arabs and members of non-Arab tribes. Consider the case of Ayub ibn Sulaiman Diallo, an Arab of the Fulani Diallo clan, who was captured by Manding raiders and sold into slavery before being transported to America. Consider also Ben Ali, an Arab who was captured during conflict with another African tribe and likewise sold into slavery in America. Even Al-Makrizi records that members of Mansa Musa's entourage purchased Turkish and Ethiopian slave girls during his famous pilgrimage. These examples remind us that slavery was a reality involving many peoples. It should not be reduced to modern racial slogans. President Traoré also criticizes young people from Burkina Faso who travel abroad to study Sharia, implying that this represents a foreign influence on his country. Yet the Manda take pride in rulers such as Mansa Musa, while the peoples of the Niger region celebrate Askia Muhammad. These were Muslim rulers who promoted Islamic scholarship and governed according to Islamic law. The ancestors of many of the peoples who today live in Burkina Faso were doing exactly that centuries ago. They traveled in search of Islamic knowledge, studied under renowned scholars, and returned to their own lands to teach, judge according to, and administer Islamic law. The study of Sharia was not regarded as something foreign. It formed part of the religious, legal, and intellectual tradition of many of the kingdoms and tribes of the region. History deserves to be studied through the testimony of the historical sources themselves, not through modern racial ideologies. This brief presentation is only an introduction. In the forthcoming third edition of The Unknown Arabs, I will examine these subjects in much greater detail using the historical sources themselves. Thank you for listening, and peace be upon you.